read a bio that explains a lot about her accomplishments in terms of the UN and in terms of developing a voice for sustainability in the Delegation Nation and around the world. And so we are, I hope I may not need to say too much more than that to introduce you, but we are delighted to have you here today.
How I want to tell them to do? They do what? It takes up? You ain't supposed to know how to talk about that. It'll help you if I speak like this better. That's better. No? ¿Qué pasa? ¿Cómo está? Okay. Which one works? This one? This language? Yeah. It's not like this. This way. Yes? Okay. He said see. So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So how y'all doing?
Doing all right.
Much better from getting in here out of the cold, right? You thought the dog was going to run all the way to the door and just jump out, right? Y'all had to get out here. Need a little bit of fur on us all today, right? So now, who here is majoring in environmental studies? Everybody?
All but two.
All but two. Who are the two? The ones who didn't want to move at all. What are your majors?
I'm minor in environmental studies, but I study philosophy and government.
Philosophy and government. We need you in philosophy and government to deal with environmental issues. We need that.
Both business, econ major, environmental monitoring.
Ah, we need you too. Yeah, because people want to calculate what's involved in what your professor just said, sustainability, right? And whether or not things are sustainable when you start talking about using the environment for it. I don't know why these guys in politics can't understand why the environment is important. I don't know why they don't think spaces like this are important, that they assume that we should put buildings and concrete over everything in spite of all the flooding and everything else that we have seen. And there's this thing called climate change that some people still think don't exist. I do. Okay. And I'm a computer scientist, a mathematician. I think it's real. You know, I think the fact that we had, what was it, 6 degrees? And such on St. Helena Island, where we never had those temperatures before, is pretty real to me. Okay? So I think it's critical that we have more voices, especially in this kind of arena, especially those who are going to study environment and politics. Because maybe you can be a voice that can speak in language that politicians speak that will get a lot more than to engage in this process. Because in terms of right now, the focus on environmental issues largely connects people through culture, cultural heritage. But now we go to the business folks, the economy folks. A lot of people are using cultural heritage as a tourism vehicle. And they want to use the cultural heritage of towns and cities to bring more and more tourists. But when you bring more and more tourists, they then tell you, well, we need to widen the roads because there's now so much traffic. We need to widen the road, and that way, the more the tourists come, we have more lanes for them to travel down. But as someone who was an engineer, a traffic engineer, told me, he said, well, Queen, you know, really though, widening a road to deal with transportation issues and traffic is like loosening your belt to deal with obesity. Really doesn't solve it. You still are going to have some issues now that you've done that, probably more than you thought. The other fact of the matter is, once you build a road, where you're building the road to go, these people are still coming. Where are they going to stay? Now we need buildings. So we're back to, let's build over every square foot of land so that we can have hotels and resorts and the places the tourists want to come to. And then when the tourists get there and they go, wait a minute, this is a city. I thought it was come to a rural environment where the culture was. Where's the cultural heritage of the people? And they're like, well, we have it. It's behind the hotel. It's down there. We have like a little village of them over there. You know? And we'll charge you an extra $100 a night if you want the room that you can actually look at that village from the window. Right? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You know, being a person that lives my cultural heritage, but I witnessed this. Every place that I travel to. But what is a good thing that I'm witnessing now are the people who are becoming more engaged from a perspective that many of my people have tried to get them to engage in for over 20 years now. And how do you protect the various things that are considered tangible and intangible aspects of cultural heritage while you are faced with tourism dynamics, economic issues, and especially environmental changes? How do you protect that? Because what's your cultural heritage?
I come from Eastern German origins,
Okay.
and I have a Judaic
Background. Okay. So let's see. Let's say, for instance, there was a 300-year-old Torah that was connected to your family, and it had been in a synagogue in a town where maybe your family, when they got over here, had found and worship. Would you want someone to think, oh, it doesn't matter, we can knock that building down, I mean, you know, because it's going to be more cost effective for us to put condos in?
Of course not.
You wouldn't, right?
Of course not.
And you especially would not want them to knock it down with that in it. That would be considered family heirloom, a treasure, some would say an artifact, right? So here we go, that's considered, that Torah would be considered tangible because we could touch it. But her feelings about it are the intangible cultural heritage. Who can calculate the value of that? You see, if we got that Torah out of there and we took it to a book of praise, they might give us, yeah, like my side job, right? So if we give it to a book of praise, they might say it's worth $150,000, it's worth $250,000. But we can never calculate the value of her feelings, her emotions, her family heritage that attaches to that place and that space. So when we build over it, just quote, willy-nilly, we're never adding that up. One of the things that we've constantly used as a tool in the Gullah Geechee Nation, when they wanted to widen roads, when they wanted to just build over things that are sacred to us, were the fact that DOTs, Departments of Transportation, many times have to do community impact assessments. Most people don't know that. So if you don't know, you can't use the tool, okay? But when we found out this thing existed, that would be an argument every time. Where has the community impact been assessed? Show it to us. You don't know what level of damage you'll do to this community if you don't assess it. And if we are the community and we haven't had a chance to tell you anything, you definitely don't know. So to you, why not knock it down? Why is it important? It's just sitting there. It's not just sitting there. Those trees look like they're just sitting there. But would you think those trees are helping us out?
Absolutely.
Right? Kind of helping us stay alive, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit important. Right? Okay. Maybe kind of, sort of. So, do you think we should just go around and cut every tree down on the earth? No. But if I'm a destruction there, oops, y'all call me developers. To me, why not cut them all down? Because you're not in my plan. Not the way you're growing here. So I gotta cut you. You don't look right. Now I'm gonna plant one here, one here, same distance, one here. Now it's perfect. You get it? Because this is my plan. This has to override what the Creator's plan is. It has to be better. But look at all that open space you just created in a hurricane zone. You just created an actual zone where all the wind in the world that wants to get in just comes straight on through. Where when all of those trees were standing, what you think happened? Huh? There's a windbreak. So it's just like right now. I couldn't go and just run at this guy. I'm sure. What's your name?
Hunter.
Hunter? I could probably knock Hunter down very easily. I just take a run at Hunter, knock him down and shit. Right? But now, if Hunter locked arms with the folks next to him, it's always harder to knock you down. Always harder to move you out of the way. That's why the trees create a break. They're together. They were designed to stand together so that they can protect what else is there. Not only buildings we decide to put there, but the roots of the trees keep the soil in place. I nearly went to federal prison because I took a sea oat. Because I didn't know what the sea oat was. We just see them grow here and there along our intercoastal waterway, along the beaches. They just look cute, they look pretty. So this picture that has gone around the world of me, I'm standing in sea oats like this, probably my indigo blue. And afterwards I popped a piece off. I was like, ooh, keeping this. From Morris Island, which is now a historic area. Why? Because a whole group of us stood together to prevent destruction, that's what I call it instead of development, to come to Morris Island. Well, I was with the federal government. They were the ones that brought me over there on a pontoon. So they walk over and they say, all right, Queen, we ain't gonna say nothing. I said, what are you talking about? You saw what you took? I was like, what's the joke about what I took? What are you talking about? We saw you take the sea oat. The sea oat? I said, you mean the thing that I just stood up and said, they said, yeah. I said, what's the big deal? They said, you know that that's a felony to pick a sea oat? I said, no, I didn't, but I know also ignorance of the law is no defense. So what are you talking about? They said, y'all, I said, y'all joking. They said, no, actually, we're not going to say anything. But you are not supposed to pick, no one's supposed to pick sea oats. I said, what? It looks like that big or smaller. They're really like that big. Okay? I'm like, this thing with the stalk this big and leaves that tiny, what's the big deal? They said, because below, the roots of the sea oats help keep all those sand dunes in place. So that's why we don't want people picking them and taking them down. So it's actually a federal offense. I had on a T-strap dress, no pockets. My pocketbook's not on me right now. We came over on a pontoon. So what's the gal do? All righty. Can't let the rest of y'all see me get on the federal boat with the sea oat. We drop the sea oat in. We push it down, and we hold the sea oat. Get over to my assistant, and I said, listen, if something's gonna drop, I need you to pick it up. He says, okay. And I walk away, and he goes and he does this, and he shows it in the pocket. We get on the boat, he's like, what do you got me into? What is that? I'll tell you later. Don't speak now. I'll tell you later. We get off the boat, I said, it's a federal offense for me to pick the thing. He said, you got me with it in my pocket. He looked at me like Hunter was looking at me when I said I'll run at him and knock him down. You know? It's like, are you kidding? I said, actually I'm not. And after I looked up the sea oat to learn more about it. But although it looks tiny, it looks skinny, it looks like it's no big deal, but it's pretty, it's holding the earth together. So again, they said one man's junk is another man's treasure. To somebody else, they're like, yeah, whatever it is, this is some bush that's growing along the ocean. Here it is, that bush has a value for all of us. Because it helps keep those barrier islands or sea islands in place. And if we don't have them, even y'all up here are in a lot of danger of hurricanes. You see? Because there'll be nothing to hold the wind back. Nothing to hold the soil in place there. It all just goes on. So that's why we thought it was important for me to spend a little bit of time with you who learn, in theory, environmental issues, right? You study the environment from inside the classroom. You don't get to go outside much? Any classes y'all do? Really? What y'all do when you go outside? Kayaking! That's it? Really? So y'all go hang out. And it used as an excuse, right? It's classwork. And when you come back in, what do you have to do? Oh, they looked at me as if to say, dude, there's nothing. What do you mean? We kayak. That's it. You don't write about it, you blog about it, you stop lying. Y'all were like looking at me like, you don't do that. We're not doing kayak. No, really, do you? All right, so give me a quick sentence. What did you write about? You went kayaking.
I went kayaking last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wrote about how I would really appreciate the water system for.
Okay. See? You just hung out. You don't know what you want.
There's a lot of human influence that they've messed with it a little bit.
Okay.
So we talk about.
You talking
Actually,
about-
missed both of them.
You met both kayak
Yeah,
trips?
they had two separate ones at a golf tournament.
Oh, you out there doing the other thing that's causing Gullah Geechee's a problem. We don't eat them white balls. We don't eat them. We don't need any more acres of golf courses. Yeah, but you do know that they're now using golf courses as a way to sort of retrofit
Kiowa.
brownfields.
Kiowa Ocean Course.
Oh, that's what you're doing?
Yeah, I've looked into, some of the Audubon.
Things that they're doing.
Yes.
But you knew about the sand spit thing that we had too, the legal case we had out there, of people trying to build a seawall.
Oh, I've heard a little bit about that.
We came here for Glendale and went outside with Terry Gifford, a poet, so we actually wrote poetry.
Ah, you
I don't
you
remember.
don't remember either.
I don't
You
agree.
don't remember either.
I read about the pollution in the river, how
Oh.
it wasn't higher in here, so.
Oh, okay, so you saw some environmental damage.
What about some of the trees I saw?
Trees. Interesting.
We talked about like the human impact on the river, about the pollution.
Okay.
We read about like the geologic history of the river, and so the ice rock is weathered by water over geologic time. So it used to be like 15 kilometers higher than it is now. Is
Wow.
that weathering of the river?
In the river.
Yeah.
Okay, and some of the human impacts they probably talked
Yeah,
about too,
well, like
right?
there's an ironworks that blew up some of the rocks.
Oh, really?
Resources, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, we got out midway while we were kayaking and talked about how with the weathering, and then we also talked about like how the trees have changed over time, but people are planting.
Different kinds
Yeah, so I read about that.
that are not necessarily indigenous to Svalbard. Mm-hmm.
Talk about the wildlife,
Mm-hmm.
birds and fish and everything.
Nice.
Oh, the trees, sulfur, orchards.
Oh, interesting. What the baby write? I know the baby went on the kayak.
I read about all the noises, the trees, the waters, animals.
The trees were making noise?
When the wind blows.
When the wind blows. Ah, so is it the tree or is it the wind? And if the tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound?
When the wind blows.
It's the wind blows.
Flooding and the movement of sediment deposits.
Mm-hmm. So you know what I'm talking about, but the CO's moving perfectly, moving sediments, so it's not there.
Just the serenity and the sense of calmness.
Yep. On my first history books, and how was learning. Oh,
Yeah, geology.
geology as well.
I was in the same poetry class and we kind of compared the natural history of where we're from to Spartanburg and out here. It was kind of cool to see the similarities.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Yes.
I just remember talking about the history of the watershed, like around
Mm-hmm.
Glendale.
Nice. The political poet, scribing. And
Not as stupid.
you're not stupid. That don't mean you didn't go on the kayak trip.
I didn't write about it, but I remember thinking a lot about, how when you're present, I think you're the happiest. Because you're not thinking about your past or your future, you're right there in the here and now.
Interesting.
Meditative.
Meditative. So did you take them on this kayak trip?
I take my students in one of the science classes to go kayaking, yes.
Okay, why kayaking? Why'd you pick that?
Well, for one thing, we have these beautiful boats that we can take, but because it allows you to be immersed without seeing, in many cases, even though there is human impact, we don't see it from the river. And so it's one of the few ways we can actually get out into nature in a way where we're not surrounded by human destruction and to really feel what that's like, to feel a taste of wilderness.
Right, that's interesting, and you use a critical term. One of our major partners of the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition and our Gullah Geechee Sustainability Think Tank is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. National Wildlife Refuge System. So I've gone on several different boat outings. Y'all can see it on YouTube, put in Queen Quet and U.S. Fish and Wildlife or National Wildlife Refuges, and you'll see a couple of the journeys. And that's one of the things that have amazed people who are actually from the same areas where I went, because they're so used to seeing it from the roadside, not the riverside, okay? And as you mentioned, then it puts them in that present moment. So even though they're watching me in the screen, they end up like, oh my God, I felt like I was in the boat with you. Right, that was the purpose. I want you to feel that way, and I would like you to go out on the boat, and you can see the difference in the landscape, and see the landscape more from the perspective of what our ancestors and our elders saw, versus what we see now, where you see the closed down Krispy Kreme and the food line and all those things. But if you go out on the water, you go, wait a minute, is this the same place? Am I still in the same county? Am I still in the same town? You know, and you start to actually connect to those sounds, right? Totally different sound with that wind blowing, the water currents, the fish jumping out, all of that. Then riding in the car, riding in the bus, right? With the dog, with the terrier, right? Totally different sound. And so I think it's a great idea. I've never heard of an environmental class that actually took the group kayaking on a science class that took them kayaking. Usually that's kind of an extramural, right? Intramural activities and extracurricular.
It's totally central to what we are
Do.
about in our department, to have people out as much as possible.
Which is good. So that's why I said to them, when you know in that class, she was like, no, we go out. So now, that was a class trip. How many of you actually do any type of environmental work and engagement in the community outside of class? Raise your hand. Okay, for instance, what?
I'm putting together, well, I guess that's still inside of class. Oh, sort of senior capstone, we have a, I guess, project we do, putting together a paddle guide for South Carolina, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Water system.
All right. This side? Setting us outside of class? Yeah.
I work for Homeland Security now.
Oh,
And I'll be moving to DC in June.
okay.
The part of Homeland Security I work for is with the EPA, and we're specializing in water quality management.
Interesting. So I'll be seeing you again, it sounds like.
I started a small residential compost collection business, that we picked up people's organic scraps, and then composted that, and then brought back some of that composted material, we could use in their own gardens and stuff at home. And just sort of used this as a way for people to kind of teach themselves about their histories and what they were throwing away and where.
And how it could actually be valuable,
Yes.
right? Again, that one man's junk, another man's treasure. So sometimes it is about reuse, right? And how we show it to people, how it can be used in a different way. Like talking about kayaking. It's being used in a tourism way where we are. But how great it would be if it was an ecotourism, educational journey for most people. And a lot of people, that's not what it is. They just are adventure seekers. They're like, oh, just want to see if I can make it through here with the rough waves, you know? Or just never been in this part of the country, just want to go see. But they never learn about the culture, the traditions, or the history, or the cultural heritage of that area. They're just out there alone. But if they went out alongside of the Gullah Geechee Bato boat, and someone could explain what are those fish jumping out of the water, why are they critical to our existence? I remember when I went out in the Bato boat and kept wondering what were these little things jumping in the air looking like bugs, and then realized they were shrimp. Because they were leaping out of the water trying to get out our way so they didn't get eaten and get caught in the cast nets. And I was like, they jumping that high out of the water? They were like, yes. I said, yeah, I guess if I was running for my life, I'd jump as high as I could do. You know, land over there, do something. But this is an experience that if someone's never lived on water, they wouldn't have it. A lot of inland people never had this experience you always had with the kayak, except for the golfer who missed the 2 trips, right? And so this is an experience that many urban people never had. They never get to see a watershed with their physical eyes right there where they can be present in. They see water come out of the spigot inside the house, and that's it. Okay? And so to come here to this kind of a space and see this river and know that this was a place for people of African descent to not only make bricks along it, but to be able to spiritually retreat. There's a statement in the Gullah Geechee Nation of Proverbs, the water to bring me, the water might take me back. And so it has a spiritual connection to us at all times, the water. So we don't see it as a recreational tool. We see it as a system of nourishment. So again, everything that's part of it, to us, is part of us. So that's why I asked that question, well, beyond class, what else are you doing? Because I thought a whole bunch of you would say, well, I was so inspired by the trip on the water, I started doing this, that, and the other with water. You know, working on these things, hopefully you do.
Don't you do a lot of outreach with the kids? Really, is one who does most of it.
Outreach to young children.
Yeah, we have a lot of groups that come out here and use this space, and we've had kids say, is this real, is that real?
Really?
And they see bugs and stuff out here, and it's really rewarding.
And they live here in Spartanburg,
Mhm.
see?
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
even just in our
a few
own
miles
community.
away.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just because they've never seen it. And look where it is. Technically, it's behind buildings.
Yeah.
So it's like they could travel up there and maybe not pay
Not even
attention
know
to
it's
their
there.
notice it that close, you know? And that's the thing. And now, especially if you're on your phone, you'll be walking until you walk into it, whoops, right? From the phone, right? So that's another dilemma we have with making people respect and appreciate the environment when a lot of everything is going on here to here. Not even looking up, not even looking around. People text people and they sit next to them. They don't talk. I sent a text to Hunter over there. Yeah, he writes back, hey. You know, instead of, Hunter, hey, what's going on, man? You know, he's right there. You know, no, he sent a picture. Yeah, selfie. Selfie, send it to him. He said right there. You know, so that's another issue that y'all's gonna have to tackle. Because if you're gonna be our next set of environmentalists, trust me, that is a big issue now. How do you get people outside? Free food always tends to work. Music, free food, drink, helps. Yeah. You need those things, you got them, man. But how long they stay out there?
Exactly.
Yeah, we don't, if they're drinking the wrong thing and the food's gone, they haven't seen anything. Go home. The water was beautiful, what water? Right there. So you want to make sure we have a job. And it's not going to be an easy one. It's going to be like navigating in a kayak on some rough water sometimes when you deal with the environment. Because not everyone is going to appreciate your perspective. They may not see it as something that can be used as educational. They may be trying to see it as economic and not see the two trains meet. So, I just wanted to give you a little bit to start off. And then let's see what I'm going to want from me while I be here. Why y'all got a chance? Let's see how the discussion flows from here. Any questions? Comments? You bored still? You ready to go out on the kayak trip? Hunter, what's going on? Send me a selfie. No, go ahead.
You mentioned that you're from St. Helena.
Yes.
One of the concerns was that St. Helena will start with the development that's coming to the island. It'll start to maybe look like Hilton Head with tons and tons of tourists coming from all over the country to come there. Do you see that happening in the near future? And if so, you know, can you potentially stop it, or is it almost inevitable?
No, I don't see that happening to St. Helena, and I'll tell you why. One, I live there. Two, that's the main one. Two, we also have a law in the Beaufort County Zoning District Standards Ordinance, which is a precedent, a national precedent, called Cultural Protection Overlay District. And it is Appendix K of the Beaufort Zoning District Standards Ordinance, or the ZDSO. We fought for many years to ensure that there would be a law on the books that prevented certain things from being built on St. Helena Island, because those things specifically would harm Gullah culture. It was the first zoning law to exist that specifically mentioned the culture and not being able to build things because of the negative impact it would have on the culture. So no gated areas are allowed, no golf courses are allowed, so I'm sorry you can't, got kicked on the table. And no franchise style businesses. And the reason we could not point blank say no franchise businesses was because they said, well, you can't technically override, because it's a free market system and all these other things, that you can't technically ban someone from operating a particular type of business. So what happens is you can say no franchise style businesses, which would mean they need to do reuse of old buildings, or if you were to build something new, it needs to reflect the architecture that already exists, so that it will fit in. Because as you all know, stores may start out a certain size and then the next thing, oh, we're so successful, we want a super store of the whatever store it was. And so now we'd be left with something totally out of place on a historic island, but at least if it had to look like, say, a packing shed, right? That might be something we could retrofit and maybe farmers could then end up using it if this business moved out, that kind of thing. So that's why I don't see that coming to St. Helena. I also don't see it coming to St. Helena because St. Helena Islanders we own 95%, 90 to 95% of St. Helena Island, unlike other islands around us, even in our same county, like Hilton Head. We have had a cohesion over generations on St. Helena that I have not witnessed on any of the other sea islands yet. In Georgia, in Florida, North Carolina, or other parts of South Carolina, I have not witnessed that. Everyone on St. Helena can tell you what area of the island somebody is from based on their surname. They can tell you things, that we're connected, we're interlinked. So when there's an issue, it's an island issue. It's not oh, that's your problem on St. Helena. Where Hilton Head, it was like, oh, well, that's over there, so it's not us. And that's why it was easy to get in and sort of divide and conquer. And now Hilton Head is almost doing us a favor because they're going out of their way right now to dump all this money into cultural heritage tourism, even though they've eliminated, knocked down almost all the houses and original buildings that Gullah Geechee built. Now they want to market Gullah Geechee tourism to Hilton Head. Of course, just to get people in the hotels over there, right? And revitalize what they're doing. But if they keep marketing Hilton Head for you to go to, you'll stay away from staying on St. Helena. You see what I mean? So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's almost like you're doing us a favor. Now, we prefer cultural tourism and ecotourism. So that this way means you have to have a guide. And that should be a native of the island to guide you around. This way, sacred sites aren't damaged. They're not bothered with. There's this thing called caching people have started doing, putting things in even burial areas and all this, and then going and hunting for them with Geiger counters and all kinds of sick stuff. So we put a lot of things into law so that when people would come in our community, they respect what we have there. And we could also keep the things that are sacred in certain areas, even certain waterway access areas we don't want people going to. We don't want them finding those. So that way, the person who's from there can take you to places that are more open to things and more open to some traffic. But then after you finish, thank you, yeah. All right, love you. All right, go ahead, get a hotel in Beaufort. All right, yes. All right, bye. Okay, so we have some campsites on St. Helena. We have the Hunting Island State Park, which has a camping area. So again, you can use ecotourism and not have such a negative human impact. So, and then I was going to say that. So the only hotel is the Quality Inn that's on St. Helena now. And that's right in the heart of what's been historically the business district, even during transatlantic slave trade. That was the little business district called Corners Community. So I also chaired the plan that designed that area as a public market district. And so that we would not have all this other sprawl going across the island, but keep those kind of more intense businesses right within. It's only about a 2-mile distance on the island. The island's 15 miles long one way and 11 miles the other way. So try to keep it contained. So that's why I say truly, I live there. So no, I have no vision whatsoever that that's coming anytime in the near future. Now, when I'm dead and gone, I'm still gonna come back and like haunt people or whatever. I don't expect it to happen there. I would hope that they would have learned and that St. Helena will stand as a beacon to other sea islands and other places where people would say, no, we need places like this. we need this. Because right next to us, Ladies Island is overdone already. Yeah, it's overbuilding, it's ridiculous. And it didn't look like that 20 years ago. Yeah.
How much is the overbuilding in adjacent lands affecting the water quality and the availability of the seafood that we all fish for?
Excellent question. We have, well, the water quality has been greatly impacted, but because we also are part of the Ace Basin, where the Ashtaboo and the Edinstone come together, and that is considered like a national treasure now, and millions of dollars have gone into, you know, really restoring it and trying to keep the waterways healthy there. I have been a part of the Ace Basin Living Shoreline Project to do more oyster shelf rebuilds there, and so more oyster bed rebuilds, because one oyster will filter 50 gallons of water a day by itself. And so the more beds we have, thousands of gallons of water. And so we've been very successful in getting money, federal money and grants to do that over the last couple of years. So it looks like we're leveraging more and more partners, more and more environmental partners, and that always looks better and better, you know, for people to say, well, we don't keep giving to that group because there's 20, 30, 40 organizations in it, you know, and they're nonprofits and they're federal and they're state and they're all working together. This is a good example. So that's been beneficial. So it's helping in areas where we used to have shellfish bed closings, or where there were no oysters or anything like that. That's where the worst of the water quality was. And those are usually right where people build private docks, right where they have marinas, and where there's golf courses. Because the things that they clean and sustain the golf courses with to keep them green on year are chemicals, runoff. Where they clean their yachts, chemicals, right into the water. Sometimes you have oil leaks out of the boat, right into the water. So those areas have had a lot of damage. That's why nobody picks the Fusky oysters anymore. Nobody picks oysters on Hilton Head or Conch or anything anymore. It's against the law to do it because they had so much damage from what was overbuilt and the Savannah River plant and the Savannah watershed coming down through from Savannah from the other side. Fortunately, on St. Helens side, we have had much more pristine waters and a better situation with water quality, so we're just trying to continue it, you know, and make it even better in the upper parts of Beaufort County. Now, the interesting thing is, you asked also about not only the water quality issues, but what was your other part? Was the living, about the seafood. The seafood access points are our biggest issue right now. We are lobbying the South Carolina legislature because since the Gullah Geechee Nation is actually considered a national heritage area as well, and we are considered a national minority, and you respect that we have a unique culture, all your federal reports now say that, then you need to also distinguish between Gullah Geechee fishermen and fishing families than other people. We should have special licenses so that when DNR finds some of our folks fishing, you don't fine us for the size of fish we have, the amount of fish we have, the amount of oysters we have, and all of this, because this is part of our culture and this is part of sustaining our lifestyle. Access points are a big issue. People can no longer get to all the access points because of these private docks and gated areas. And so right now we've been working with a number of geographers who have done mappings for us and have done comparative analysis wherein they found, doing GIS work, that there was only one public dock to every 30 or 35 private docks. Yeah, and that was a big wow, because we asked them to do a map for the Gullah Geechee Fishing Association so we could give the map to the brothers and sisters in it. And they said, well, it's going to be more than a map, we'll do an atlas. Well, they got intrigued when I asked them to do the public access points, like where the county and the state say these are public access points. And they said, well, wait a minute, but there's all this other records on people building their own docks and stuff. Let's see how many of those. When you see the comparative maps, it's astounding. So that's a big fight, because we can't even get to the water. Of course, we can't get to access things from the water. We also can't monitor the water quality, the level of seafood that's there. Like catfish are now extinct pretty much where we are. We don't catch them anymore. So we're also trying to work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife to try to replace some species that are on their endangered list and things like that into our waterways and things. And they also talked about snakes were endangered. He said they can remain endangered. We don't know where they're endangered at. We have a number of them on our list, and some rattlesnakes were endangered. We said, not where we are. Somebody's science is off. Okay, but if there are fish that we can help reintroduce, we want to do that. Yeah. So that's a big thing that we're working on now, especially with the Gullah Geechee Sustainability Think Tank. And in fact, we have every year in March, we have the Coastal Cultures Conference. It's going to be Saturday, March 14th this year at the Hunting Island Nature Center. So I can also email you back the link. So it's open to everyone, so anybody can come and register, and you have an opportunity to really hear from the scientists and the Gullah Geechees who've been working on these same issues, and to actually get out with us and do some work on the oyster rebuild, and so on.
In terms of kind of who holds positions of power or influence within the Gullah Geechee community, one, who's kind of the main person who's able to really make decisions that benefit the whole community?
Yes.
And also, are there times when, I guess, different, not talking about the developers, but different people who are looking for the betterment of the community run into conflict with one another? And what the aim is in terms of the fisherman who's living, whose lifestyle is based on their production or their yield, as opposed to conservationists who desire to, eliminate that. I know you talked kind of about the rights that you have as a minority group,
Right.
but where does the power kind of come
Where
from?
does it come from? Okay, well, as the head of state and the spokesperson, I'm usually the one that negotiates these kind of issues. So we have not had clashes with conservationists. They're coming from a different perspective, but we all have the ultimate same goal. So they don't see us living from the water in our traditional way as a problem, because we have very minimal impact ways that we harvest on the water. We're not trawlers. We're not going out with big shrimp trawlers to get our food. We're doing cast nets. And our tradition is take what you need, not what you want. Take only what you need, because you're going to need to come back. So it balances, and we've taught conservationists a lot because of that. They never knew any group of people existed that were like that weren't going to just go decimate an area just because they could. So now they've learned a lot from us. So our Gullah Geechee Sustainability Think Tank has brought together meetings of minds with conservationists, environmentalists, scientists, people who live on the land. And so that has been very beneficial. Now, the only time we usually get in conflict is not people who are on the same side that get in conflict. What happens is the conflict is, well, if I can just make money now, I don't think I want to fight with y'all over this issue. I'm just going to go make money. So if I can make money to entertain the tourists, I'll just go make money and entertain the tourists, but I'll never speak about any of these environmental issues. I'll never speak about displacement. I'll never bring that up, because the tourists, they ain't gonna pay me if I talk about it. I know it's a problem, but they ain't gonna pay me if I talk about it, so I'm not gonna talk about it. That's what the conflict is. Because my thing is, if you have a platform and an opportunity to use that platform to benefit the whole, if you really are about benefiting the whole, you would never miss the opportunity to tell people the truth. So it's not those who are really doing it for the greater good that ever get in conflict. It's the people who are doing it for the personal good and the people who are doing it for the greater good that get in conflict. Yeah. Yes.
What are some obstacles that you faced? I know it's probably a broad question, but I don't know if you have any examples, either like with frustration of communicating with the United Nations or just in your backyard.
Oh, and the United Nations never had any problems communicating, because all people there who are so passionate about keeping the cultures alive in their communities that, no, we all get along so well, and I love being there. The obstacles have been ignorance. That's the biggest obstacle, because people just totally lack knowledge that we exist. Okay, so that's been the biggest one. The next one has been, I heard of you people, but I thought y'all all were dead. Again, ignorance that we continue to exist. Or we only thought y'all make baskets and y'all sick. What are you doing talking about political issues? Okay, Big problem. You're a woman, how can you be a leader? They elected you a leader? You a head of state, really? It's what you're a woman and you're black. Hi, Gullah Geechees are black. Okay, so I run into that level of really just lack of knowledge, straight ignorance. So that has been a big one to overcome. The next one, the biggest challenge has been the educational system, because it is a miseducation system. If they quoted something incorrectly from somebody who was actually a racist, who was doing a caricature of Gullah Geechee culture, and they used that as the literature to teach the course, everybody in the course thinks that's real now. Multimedia is damaging because so many people have done fictional TV shows and fiction movies and based it on the Sea Islands and said it was Gullah Geechee culture. When people actually come to the Gullah Geechee Nation, they tell us what I know all about you. A woman actually said this to me. I know all about your culture. I said, you know all about my culture? This was in New York. Yes. I said, how is that? I saw the movie. And she meant this. And she had seen a fictional film. And she swore to God, it wasn't a documentary. But because the film was in black and white, she thought it was a documentary. And she now thought she knew all about me. So she don't tell me about me, or what I should be doing. Okay? So this kind of stuff has been damaging. And people don't even realize it. And then, of course, all the things we talked about. The overbuilding, the tourism, those are big challenges because when the states and the federal government think more about taxes, they think about, well, we build a lot of hotels, you get a hotel bed tax, you know, and they're thinking of bringing that money in, and they're not then thinking about what you're eliminating that is more valuable than that little tax you'll get. You see? So it's taken a long journey to get some people on the same page now. People had told things 25 years ago and said, Gullah Geechee culture is going to be the thing people want to come in to see. But nobody want to see that. Nobody here want to hear about that. Nobody want to be that. The same people now. Oh yeah, we're going to do a Gullah Geechee cultural program. How do you want to do it? You're not Gullah Geechee. But they think it's a money thing now. So that's a problem. So those are some of the big ones. But most of the time, the only conflict I have in terms of communicating with a governmental entity is not UN, it would be the Congress. And again, it's because they ignorant. It's because a lot of them don't know what, who, the Google? Never heard of y'all. What? Oh, y'all still there? Oh, we didn't know. That kind of stuff. So like now, oil drilling. Why can't we drill for oil on the East Coast? Maybe because y'all already saw what happens when you have a spill. Why would you risk that? That kind of stuff. But there's money in it. But you don't need that. You have to admit, why don't you just print some more? You know? Like, that's how my logic goes. Print more money. Don't attempt to damage the environment anymore. You know? And you know the continental shelf is delicate, and then you start blasting, and then we get earthquakes on the East Coast again, then what? Oops. No, not oops. When I'm still watching those scaffolds around, what is that, the Washington Monument, every time I go to D.C., for years now.
6 inches.
So that's the thing. That's why I keep saying to him, this is great, that somebody wants to be in politics and environment, we don't need voices. He looking like I'm rethinking this. There's a lot of work, you give me a lot of work there. Yes?
We talk a lot about like interdisciplinary approaches to like communicating with people about environmental issues and challenges and problems. And you are like an expert in a lot of different fields and disciplines. And so I didn't know if maybe you could speak to that, like if you approach things from multiple aspects every time that you approach a challenge, or if you find yourself kind of adapting to the situation, or if you've just seen some way to reach out to people being more successful, like be it like statistics or like inspiring people.
Well, I adapt to the situation and use multiple approaches and interdisciplinary approaches all the time. Because in every group, you have multiple interests there. And you have multiple ways that people learn. Some people learn well through talking to them. Others, it's better to put them in the situation and get them hands-on. People remember stuff because I sing and I do all this, they always tend to remember me, right? Where if I just sat there like a mathematician and did the stats, they'd zone out like they said, I don't even remember what I wrote about kayak. I don't remember what I don't remember what I wrote, and that's what ends up happening. So it is always good if you can have an interdisciplinary, multimedia approach that attaches to the person. What is it that person's interested in? And if you can get interested in what they're interested in and show them how your cause attaches to it, makes all the difference in the world. People would never listen to a stat, never listen to an ad, the ad council, none of that. None of that works. They won't listen to the preacher, the rabbi, nobody. And all of a sudden, you show them something, you show them interest in what they're interested in, they talk all day, and now you go, but this connects to the environment like this. Really? Yes. They'll never forget that. Yeah. Use what works.
Mm-hmm.